What is the most surprising background of a person you thought you knew? Part 3. I've mentioned this in previous posts, but when I was a teenager, we had a college student who was our neighbor. He was a cool guy, had a girlfriend, ran track at the university, specialized in social work/psychology, and participated in many community programs at the university. There was a specific program, I think it was called Upward Bound, where he worked and which brought high school students from all over the state to work and learn at the local university. He would take me there and let me play basketball and other games with people of similar ages. He seemed to be genuinely a good person. Well, it turns out he was using his community work, internships in his university programs, and eventually his professional work and so on to gain access to children. It was absolutely shocking to all of us, and my mom felt very guilty for letting me go to his house and to the university with him, even though apparently it was outside of his age range, and I assured her that nothing happened. The sweetest woman I ever met worked at the reception of my school. She called us all her babies and genuinely cared about our well-being. She was quite reserved about where she was from, only saying she had immigrated from Africa a few years ago, in the 2000s. Years later, I found out she was Tutsi and had escaped the genocide in Rwanda. A woman I met at work had established a non-profit organization in the Pacific Northwest. She helped people with substance abuse and mental health issues rebuild their lives and find permanent housing. She declared bankruptcy right at the beginning of the pandemic. It turns out she had lied about her credentials, was a severe alcoholic, barely functional, and left with quite a bit of money before dissolving the whole thing without telling the employees. I have a weird story that I thought of when I read the title. My cousin and a couple of friends went to Vancouver to visit our friend. She was attending an Indigenous performing arts school, was starting to DJ, and is now quite popular as well. Additionally, to add, we are also Indigenous. We went, and my friend hung out with very attractive people, actors, actresses, and so on. There was a girl there named Raven, super beautiful. She was Miss Teen Alberta. My cousin Levi and I tried with her but failed, of course, hahaha. After that we became friends, she and I. She was on my Facebook, and years later she wrote a post saying, "Oh my god, I'm next." And she took her own life. I never understood this. Why would she do that? She had everything and didn't seem to have a problematic life. Then I saw that her best friend, who was also very beautiful, took her own life days before her. This made everything extra mysterious. My friends and I were like, what happened to them? Did they make some sort of pact or something? We didn't get an answer. This was years ago. 2 years ago I was newly single and was chatting with this girl I was interested in, and we were telling stories, and I told her this story. Right after mentioning this she yelled Raven. I was like, how do you know this? And she mentioned that Raven was the only girl she had ever been in love with. Then she mentioned to me saying, do you know why she took her life? I said, tell me now. And I guess she took her life because her best friend was also her secret lover. Being gay was taboo in their families. Another strange detail in this story, the girl I was chatting with took her own life a few months ago. She was a former escort and had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. She was very friendly and had her problems, just wanted to get better. Rest in peace, Rachel, beautiful soul. When I was 17 to 18 years old, I worked at McDonald's. I had many friends on my work team. We often hung out after closing. The manager was older than us, maybe by about 10 years, and he was absolutely part of our social group and our hangout sessions after work. He didn't stay long, and he always seemed a bit annoyed with us, as if he was only there to keep us out of trouble and make sure we actually went home. So we never thought it was weird for him, being older, to be with us. We just saw him as an older brother. One day his wife came. None of us had met her before. She pulled me aside. I have no idea why. It was me. She told me that he and his brothers were sexually abusing her younger sister regularly and that she had just found out and is horrified to be pregnant with his daughter. To this day, that's one of the most disturbing things I've learned about someone I thought I knew. It has made me extremely cautious about having friends at work. A lovely elderly woman in my writers group risks being arrested if she ever returns to America. She's an ex-nun in her 80s, charming and kind. I once asked her why she came to Australia. She was a bit embarrassed and told me about when she was a teacher in the US. One of her students got injured. She reported it to the police, and during the report, the officer made a derogatory comment about the child because of the child's race. The nun got furious and grabbed the police officer by the collar. By this point, she had also made enemies with the gang who had attacked the child. After that, one of her brothers told her it would be best to just leave the country. I worked with an older man, very eccentric, very warm, and very hardworking. He was a big hippie in the past and was arrested protesting at Stonehenge. Turns out he was also arrested for armed robbery. He told us his friends robbed a post office in Cornwall, but the getaway driver crashed and they got caught. He said he befriended a guy in jail named Biscuit Tin. I asked him why they called him that, and he says, one day he got fed up with his wife, he chopped her head off and put it in a biscuit tin. I have no idea if it's an exaggerated story, but it entertains me every time someone asks him about his time in prison. I once worked with someone in retail sales who turned out to be the primary caregiver of a serial killer in a local nursing home in their previous job. My father spent time in a labor camp, as a prisoner of war, witnessing 2 of his brothers die, as well as a great number of men, due to abuse and self-elimination. He talked about hunger, humiliating work day after day, and constant infections. He narrowly escaped, after witnessing horrific torture, and spent a year homeless, fixing bicycles for money, hiding from the communists who were taking control. He couldn't go back home to his mother or his other brothers for a while because of his arrest warrant. He told me the story of how his mom finally found him, but she couldn't approach him or talk to him at all for fear of not knowing who was watching, because they also knew his family, so she would stare at him and leave food for him, and he had to turn around and go back where he came from, and it broke his heart every time he saw his mom and couldn't hug her. He was 19 to 20 years old when all this happened. This was during the war. He met my mom after a while and was immediately sponsored to come to the United States. He also randomly told me all this during dinner one day last year. Parents always do that with their family stories, and I know all this is true because we have an aunt who regularly paints and creates art that is heavily influenced by her trauma during the war. Every day, I realize how lucky I am to live here in the United States, and I have written songs and chapters about my father's incredible perseverance. My sister claimed she saw our church pastor playing high-stakes blackjack on the local riverboat. Naturally, I brushed it off and told her she was mistaken. About 3 months later, I saw him on the news charged with embezzling $300,000 from church funds to support his gambling addiction. He spent 2 months in jail and was relocated within the diocese. My beautiful friend from Iran shared her life experiences and how her family escaped when her husband was imprisoned in Iran, tortured, and released while being very weak. He was an Iranian diplomat, and someone told the government he was a double agent, which wasn't true. She was my coworker in elderly care, and she shared this on Christmas Eve, with so much emotional recall. It was heart-wrenching. They lived in luxury in different European countries as diplomats until this lie. They escaped through Greece, with fake passports stating they were Greek. She was terrified one of her children would speak up and they'd be captured. Her husband escaped later and now works as a cashier in a supermarket, too damaged for any other job. My grandmother. A few years ago, I stayed with her one night. She had her high school yearbook and was flipping through it. When she was reading what everyone wrote in it, I found out about her high school sweetheart and her future fiancé. At her high school graduation, she was ready to go to college, and he went to Europe to fight against the Nazis. He was killed in the war, which led her to drop out of college. I was 41 years old at the time, and it was the first time I heard of him. The only reason I knew they were planning to get engaged was because he wrote, "Can't wait to spend the rest of my life with you," in her yearbook. I still wonder how things would have been if he had lived. I was working at this dining facility in a tourist spot. Just me and this retired chef. I was working part-time there for a free ski pass. It was a good gig. One day we were talking, prepping in a commercial kitchen, and he mentioned he used to be really good at Frisbee. This 50-something retired legit 5-star chef. He used to manage high-end restaurants and luxury resorts. He tells me he won a national freestyle Frisbee championship in his day. I tell him he's talking nonsense. He grabs a steel mixing bowl and proceeds to do this elaborate freestyle Frisbee performance. I was literally speechless. My grandmother completely surprised me with what she told me about her past. I knew fragments of it. Her mother was brought from Germany as a mail-order bride in the 1920s. Her parents hated each other. My grandmother married a man she hated, etc. But about a year ago, she dropped some pearls that I'll never forget. Her father wasn't her biological father. He was the guy next door whom her mother ended up marrying after divorcing her father. My grandmother's older brother was her uncle's son. My grandmother was homeless for most of her childhood, so eventually, they sent her to live on a farm with her aunt and uncle. My grandmother hated them because they used to beat her. Eventually, the aunt and uncle handed their farm over to their sons, who were really nice people, and my mom used to take me there all the time. I always wondered why my grandmother refused to join us when my mom loved it so much. My grandfather was a devout Jew. I always wondered why he married my grandmother, who wasn't Jewish at all, especially when they hated each other and had a really toxic and violent marriage. Turns out, my grandmother converted to Judaism for him, just because she wanted to escape her violent home. I had no idea she had converted. That woman never went to temple, refused to raise her children religious, etc. I'm pretty sure even my mom didn't know, as she used to refer to herself as half Jewish. Luckily, my grandmother ended up divorcing my grandfather and married a very nice man who treated her wonderfully, so although she came from such a miserable start, everything turned out well for her. And well, friends, that was all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, let me know with a thumbs up so that YouTube can share these stories with more people. Remember to hit the bell icon to be the first to know when we upload a new video. See you next time.